Good morning, everyone. I am Dante Ang, President and CEO of the Manila Times. We're fortunate to have this morning the Ambassador of Israel to the Philippines, His Excellency Rafael Harpaz. Ambassador Harpaz arrived in the Philippines in August 2018. Prior to his designation as Israel's ambassador to the Philippines, he served as the director of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Central Asia and Caucasus Department since December 2015. He served as Israel's ambassador to Azerbaijan and Director of Public Affairs Department in the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C. He also served as Deputy Chief of Mission in the Embassy of Israel in Stockholm, Sweden, Bern, Switzerland, and Abidjan, Ivory Coast. In the ministry's head office in Jerusalem, Ambassador Harpaz served as the head of the Economic Department for Africa and America from 2009 to 2012. Welcome, Ambassador, again to the Manila Times. Thank you for agreeing to this. Before we ask you the questions we'd like to ask, or we intended to ask, Israel has been in the news. There's trouble in your country. Perhaps you can give us the latest on what's happening in Israel and in Palestine.
Okay, while we are talking, barrage of rockets are falling all over Israel, especially on the Tel Aviv region and the area around Gaza Strip, by Hamas terrorist group, which is sponsored by Iran, by Islamic Jihad. It's terrorist groups that wants the annihilation of Israel. More than 500 rockets were shot on Israel in the last 36 hours, including 137 rockets in a period of 15 minutes. Now we have the Iron Dome system that can protect us, and it actually took away 90% of the rockets, but still people are being injured, people are being killed, and Israel has the right for self-defense to protect its citizens. The Hamas is attacking Israel from civilian areas in Gaza. They attack civilians in Israel. It's a war crime. And the international community should condemn those terrorist acts. In Israel, we are 73 years old, and we're still surrounded by a terrorist group, non-state organization, which are attacking us day after day, attacking indiscriminately children, schools, and innocent civilians.
Ambassador, what triggered this latest episode? Because from my understanding, rockets have been fired toward Israel from Palestinian areas for many years now. It's going on and off. What is behind this recent episode?
First, those attacks are coming only from the Gaza Strip. And Israel left Gaza Strip already in 2005. It's not an occupied territory, nothing. But since then, Hamas is attacking Israel. It's every few months or every few years they attack us again. The goal of Hamas is not a territorial issue. It's not they just don't accept the existence of the Jewish state. This is you see the statements of Hamas. They never recognize the fact that Israel has a right to exist. This time they used the tension that was in Jerusalem, and there was some tension in Jerusalem, as a provocation. They just use the pretext, and they have those rockets. Instead of supporting their people, bringing them, strengthening their economy, fighting COVID, this is their agenda. And again, like every other country, like the Philippines was attacked in Marawi a few years ago. We have the full right to protect ourselves, and that's what we are doing. We are a strong country, but we can't accept those attacks. And it's just a provocation of Hamas, and it's a war crime.
Ambassador, have the attacks been more deadly this time? Because I remember from the past news that these attacks sometimes just they hit open areas, and so Israel has been trying to restrain itself. But there's been some deaths now.
Yeah, just a few minutes ago, 2 women died in the city of Lud, near the international airport in Tel Aviv. It aims directly. By the way, it's not justified also to send any rocket to Israel, but it hits directly the big centers of population of Israel. And there's not one other country in the world that would agree for this. So they went aggressively. They initiated it. And now we are responding. And we are responding, by the way, and we try to prevent as much as we can any civilian people to be killed, in difference from them that they are targeting intentionally our citizens. This is the bottom line.
Well, Ambassador, how do you think this will play out? Because I think I've heard your president say that they're even considering airstrikes to retaliate. What do you think will happen?
Well, we are fighting a terrorist group, so they are unpredictable. You can't, they can be. Israel will do whatever necessary to protect itself, and we have to make sure that Hamas will be totally retaliated, and will think twice and three times before he's initiating any kind of a terrorist attack, a terror attack against. But it's an equation that we think logically. We are, Philippines is a state, Israel is a state. This is a terrorist group sponsored by Iran, so they have a state-sponsored organization, and the way of thinking is different from ours. And this is a major challenge. And again, all the life are disrupted in Israel for the last 48 hours. And we will do whatever we can to protect our citizens. We can't accept it. Nobody would accept it. And when you're being attacked, you have to defend yourself, and that's what we do. And we need to take care of the roots of this terrorism, this hatred against Israel. And what we saw in the last few years is almost full acceptance of Israel in the Arab world. We have, relations with the Emirates, breakthrough, with Bahrain, with Egypt, with Jordan, with Morocco, with many other countries. It's a new world, but the terrorist group still stayed behind, and they still think in the old terminology that we knew for tens of years ago.
How do you think this will impact? There have been some initiatives to have some peace talks, right, with the Palestinians. This is definitely a setback, but how can we get back on track, or does Israel want to get back on track?
Yeah, in general, Israel would like to have peaceful relations with all our neighbors. Hamas is a different story, and the Palestinian Authority is a different story. But Hamas' goal is to when you talk to someone that want to destroy you, what is there to talk to them? That's why we can talk. With the Palestinian Authority, we have talked, but this is, it's not a conflict that can be solved very easily. But the fact is that most of the Arab world recognize that bilateral relations with Israel are very important. That's why we have Israel is a strong country, advanced country, number one in COVID, taking care of COVID in the world, and that's why the world has changed, but not with this terrorist group. And I think the main source of this is really the ideology, the extreme Islamic ideology of Hamas, Islamic Jihad. A mixture with these capabilities of attacking you with missiles. That some of them are smuggled, or being from Iran or others. Some of them are being manufactured in Gaza Strip.
Well, Ambassador, you mentioned COVID. Israel has been making the news on that front as well, but in a good way. You have gotten around the crisis much earlier than most countries. Can you give us the latest developments on the pandemic situation in your country?
I just connected for a moment, with your permission, about the situation, because we vaccinated the Palestinian workers which are working in Israel. We're vaccinated by Israel, for example. Give you an example. So we give vaccinations and we get rockets on Israel. This is the equation. Just give an example. When it comes to the issue of COVID, Israel is, and again, it's very challenging for me to speak about those issues today when Israel is under a barrage of rockets. But generally, Israel is a success story. The success of Israel in, this virus, it's ups and downs. So we have to be very, very cautious with it. But generally, today in Israel, life is normal. When there is no conflict with Hamas, life is pretty normal. Until 2 days ago, schools are back, no masks outside. The success is first bringing the vaccines. We got the vaccines, we were willing first, and we were willing to start the project of inoculation first. So Israel is some kind of laboratory for the world to see how, and then we received it when the fake news were very, very strong all over the world. Second, Israel is a great public health system with a very strong HMOs. So there were days, we are 9.3 million people. There were a few days that we vaccinated 200,000 people per day. I was there in Israel, 200,000 people per day. So today, 5.5 million Israelis already been vaccinated with the first shot, and more than 5 million Israelis were vaccinated twice. FDA just approved the vaccination of children from the age of 12 to 16. We are usually following the US FDA guidelines. We have only Pfizer and Moderna, and we vaccinated the people that we vaccinated were vaccinated by Pfizer. So most of the eligible, around 80% of the eligible Israelis were vaccinated. And we already signed an agreement just a few weeks ago with Pfizer and Moderna for another 16 million doses, which will cover for 2022. And this is not for first and second shot. This is planning for a third shot, a booster with the variants. So we know that we might be among the first ones when it will, if and when there will be a booster shot. So the efficiency of the HMOs in Israel was critical in this. And I tell you how it works. You are invited to get the vaccine. It's in your neighborhood, no lines. It's all computerized. You go, you show up, you get the shot. You need to wait 15 minutes if there is any side effects. During those 15 minutes, you get a text message with an invitation for 21 days exactly for the second shot. They keep the second shot for you. You go after 21 days, you get the second shot, again you wait 15 minutes, and during those 15 minutes you get a green passport that tells you that's the day of the first one, that's the second one, the validity of it. And now we extended the validity of the inoculation. At the beginning it was only for 6 months, but now we know it's working. And it's for until the end of the year, so which means it's 1 year actually, until the end of December. We started in December, and the results are staggering. The Pfizer vaccines protect you after 28 days from start to the end. 96% of people won't get sick at all, and those that will get sick, it will be mostly asymptomatic or very mildly sick.
You mentioned that Israel has also been giving vaccines to Palestinians. Now, has that stopped now because of what's going on?
I'm not aware of it.
Has that been interrupted?
It's the last 36 hours, so I think it's those that are entering Israel receive the vaccine in order to prevent the public further. I don't know. I'm not aware of this.
Well, I hope that things will settle down in Israel, and of course, everybody deserves to live in peace.
Yeah.
I heard in your other interview, I think with ANC, you're saying that you have enough vaccines, but I think we couldn't resist. People here couldn't resist asking you whether or not Israel can share some of those with the Philippines.
Okay, well, good question.
First of all, some constraints with that, I think you said.
First, we shared it already because 30,000 Filipinos, OFWs in Israel, been vaccinated by the government of Israel.
Yes.
By the way, with no charges, it's part of their, all of them by Pfizer, approximately 30,000. In addition, we have sent during this pandemic year hundreds of students of TESTA to Israel. They've all been vaccinated. The Filipino embassy in Israel, the team, the ambassador, and all the diplomats and their families were vaccinated. So I'm very proud of it. Israel, until now, there is a request for, I think, around 20 countries to receive some vaccines from Israel as assistance, including the Philippines. And it's something that will be top priority whenever the Philippines will be definitely top priority in this region of Southeast Asia, whenever Israel will be able to give away vaccines. We didn't give any country. It has nothing to do with the Philippines due to first the contracts that we have with the pharmaceutical to a third party, and also there are legal constraints in Israel about it. So whenever it will come, the day the Philippines will be top priority, but we assisted the Philippines beside and in addition of vaccinating the tens of thousands of Filipinos in Israel, first by working very closely with the IATF about sharing our experience how Israel is dealing with the vaccination program, with public health, all those issues. This was very important. Then giving the Philippines batches of assistance. I was honored to give both to our donations to the Department of Education, distance learning material, and also to the Philippine National Police, the Department of National Defense. We were immediately from the beginning, and we are looking forward to assist whenever we can. So this is what we did until now.
Right. So what are some of those recommendations or experiences that you've shared that you think is going to make a big impact in the Philippines?
Well, I'm not in a position to give advice to the Philippines. I'll tell you what's the lessons that we have learned until now in Israel. First, one, I think we need to strengthen our health systems. this is clear. And in Israel, we succeeded in dealing, there was a lot of pressure. There were certain moments that the numbers were so high that there was enormous pressure, and we need to, like in the film, open a new corona sections in the hospitals. And we understood we need to have more doctors and more budgets and more nurses. I think this is a lesson which Israel has learned. 100%, the most, I think, critical. Second, the HMOs, the important, and again, in Israel, in difference from other countries, private sector is not involved. You can't purchase a vaccine in Israel. Impossible. It's only government. And for Israel, it works because we have a very strong, 4 HMOs. Each Israeli is a member of an HMO. That's where you get all your basic medical services, and it's worked perfectly. Third issue is, it's crucial, is the issue of the education system. If I'm looking at what a challenge for pupils to stay home for more than a year without school, without kindergarten. Now we have in Israel, we have the technology. Almost all Israeli pupils, almost, not all of them, has a computer at home, has a good access to the internet, but the emotional element here is enormous. Besides the fact that they don't go to school, they don't socialize, and we learned how we can do first school from distance, but also to do schooling in capsules. So you won't go every day to school. One day this group, the other one, this is how you are not going to transmit the disease. Another lesson that we have learned, in normal days, I was sitting in front of you, doing this interview face to face. What we have learned that we can do many things from a distance. And actually now when Israel is going out of the pandemic, we see that as a government, should we bring everybody 5 days a week to the office with traffic jams, with air pollution, with the cost, or maybe you can stay 1 day at home and guarantee that you can do your functions from home, and in many cases you can do it. So I gave you a spectrum of issues. Then the last lesson we've learned, that we have segments in our population that in cases of crisis like this, we need to give them more support. First, in all those that were unemployed, and Israel gave we never gave a package like this. And second, three major segments of our private sector: the entertainment industry, the food industry, and the tourism industry. They are the one that badly hurt. Now it's all back, not completely. Tourism is a major challenge, international one, but these are the ones that were totally, people lost all their income, and you need, in our DNA, we support people that are, not in the private sector. Private sector will manage, and now we understand, yes, we need to support those private businesses, smaller and bigger, that lost all their income, and all their employees lost their jobs for a while. That was a major challenge, and the government has to open its pockets and to have a big government deficit. Having said that, we see the economy start booming very fast in Israel. We see the economic growth, we see the collection of taxes, so it means there is a good basis for our economy. So these are the major lessons that I take for myself. Now it's, every country, it's different. You can't compare the Philippines with 110 million people and island state to Israel, which is small. But this is the lessons for a country such as Israel.
Well, I wanted to ask you also about, the political factor, because, we see in countries like the United States, even wearing masks, now convincing people to take vaccines, there's a political tone to that. And even here in the Philippines, the president, our president, is now threatening people to be arrested if they don't wear their mask. But that doesn't seem to be the case in Israel. Is that an accurate?
No.
Do people there trust the government more, or what? Is it cultural?
There was a big debate in Israel about privacy. Because they put out those apps. Let's say I met you and you were sick or you came, immediately you will be in quarantine. So there was a big, I was in Israel and then I saw people enter into quarantine because they were locating them through their cell phone. So there was a big issue what about privacy in Israel. So actually, in measures like this, in Israel, I never saw in Israel before in my life somebody wearing a mask. We don't have it in our culture. I know in some parts of Asia, even before COVID, people were. I never saw it in Israel. So a lot of challenges, and I can tell you that A lot was risk management, I would say. For example, in Israel, when you were exercising outside, also during COVID, people didn't wear masks because the assumption was you exercise, you're outside, you keep distance, it's only one or two people which are jogging, why to wear a mask? For example, something like this. Also, there is the issue of culture of discipline, and also Israelis are not, we are challenging. We are a mentality of wow, how and that was a challenge. There was a challenge, and the biggest challenge was fake news from the beginning. And here it was, I think, the issue was really to start a government campaign to fight fake news. That was one thing, but there's also people that were reluctant, especially at the beginning, to receive the vaccine because they are concerned. It's a new vaccine, it's legitimate, it's not fake news, it's totally different thing. And one of the things was a role model by the Prime Minister and President. They were the first to be vaccinated prime time to show an example, and then many celebrities and others. So it helped a lot. Still, there are people that are not vaccinated. And now what we see, it's the numbers are very low of new sick people, but it's mainly young people. It's the elderly one, which are more vulnerable, are vaccinated. Almost 100% of them. So the young people, I hope now we can start vaccinating 12 to 16 years old. Those that will be we can't force people to be vaccinated. You can't force in Israel, but you can give incentives, and that's what we are doing. So so far we are doing very well with the pandemic, even though we say I'm very cautious because we had 3 lockdowns, and we saw it. I was in Israel during the lockdown. It was quite a lockdown.
Wow. Well, Ambassador, maybe if I could shift for a minute and talk about your foreign policy with regard to Southeast Asia, and just help us understand, where does the Philippines and ASEAN figure in your foreign policy? What's our significance?
Okay. Israel, I think in the last 30 years, we start pivoting to Asia. Everybody knows it. And in the last 5-6 years, we are pivoting to countries that were important for us, but the effort is much dramatic more. And Philippines, I think in Southeast Asia is probably at the top of the list. And what symbolizes it is the historic visit of President Duterte in September 2018 to Israel. Since then, the relations are booming. And I give you the best example. During COVID, it's time when foreign missions all over the world either squeezing or staying the same. We opened here in August for the first time in our defense attaché office in my embassy. In September, we have opened our economic and commercial mission here in Manila. And at the same month, we opened our honorary consulate for Mindanao, based in Davao City. Those events happening, one of them happens in 3 years, it's good. So it shows you the importance. The fact that PAL just announced again that they are will start flying to Israel later on this year. The first that the Israeli businessmen, all of them wants to return to the Philippines to do business, but I see the Israelis waiting to return to, the tourists are waiting to return. So Philippines is very important for us, and I want to take this opportunity to thank the 30,000 Filipinos OFWs in Israel, because during the pandemic, the most vulnerable one were the elderly people. And the Filipinos in Israel are only caregivers, and they took care of our most beloved people during this pandemic when the elderly couldn't see their children and grandchildren. So we are full of gratitude for the amazing work that they are doing, and they are part of our families. And thank you very much I want to take this opportunity to thank them from the bottom of our heart.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm joined today by our senior reporter, Bernadette Tamayo, who covers foreign affairs, and our other reporter, Irene E.J. Gomez, who covers agriculture. I'd like to bring them into the discussion, beginning with Bernadette. Bernadette, would you like to ask your question first?
Ambassador, I'd like to ask an update on the defense cooperation between the Philippines and Israel. Insofar as on the area of defense training and intelligence sharing, considering that our country face terrorist attacks every now and then.
Terrorism is not, we are. This discussion is taking place while Israel is under terror attack. And terrorism is a global problem. It's in Israel now, but you have it here in the Philippines, in Mindanao and elsewhere. So it's very important. And Europe other places in Southeast Asia, Africa, it's a global problem, and that's why it's very, very important to cooperate globally. And yes, counterterrorism is one of the topics that we are cooperating with the Philippines, but also we have our very good defense cooperation in many other areas, and we do it government to government, and it's very important. This is something that's the indication, is the fact that we opened the office here of our defense attaché. It's part of it, and it's an issue that we work very closely with the Philippines.
Just a follow-up, Ambassador. Are there new discussions on this aspect? New defense training or cooperation?
Yeah, we have a system of twice a year a meeting between our officials to discuss, plans or things like this. This year, because of COVID, it can't be done physically, but it's something that we do. Those consultations on many areas, including this area of sharing, especially sharing our experience with you.
Ambassador, incidentally, when you talk about counterterrorism, it's being tackled now in our Supreme Court with our anti-terror law. Is Israel and the Philippines working together on maybe and refining our anti-terror laws? Because the questions was how to strengthen our legal system to address terrorism itself. One of the issues that was brought up in the Supreme Court deliberation was how to I suppose prevent government from going beyond what's written in the law. Right? What can we learn from Israel and maybe balancing, right, the need to address terrorism and maybe prevent, like something similar to our issues here, like red tagging and things like that?
I can't relate to the Philippines. It's your internal issues, and in my position, I won't make any comments. When it comes to Israel, we are facing terrorism during this discussion, and the country has the right to protect itself from those external enemies, and that's what we need to do, to take the right measures. I'm not an expert on the Israeli anti-terror law, so you have to ask a legal expert on this. But we are facing terror every day. And we need to be strong, and we need to be portrayed as they are strong. And I think this is the important thing. Terrorism is once 30 years ago they said, terrorism is a problem of Israel. Now it's a global problem. It's not one other country, and everybody I think understands us better. That's why we expect now, when Israel is really, I don't see any country of the world that will accept one missile on its capital. One. We had 500 missiles in Israel the last 36 hours. And they are still, and we need to hear the voice of the international community condemning it. This is an unacceptable one, and the country has a full right to defend itself. Don't forget, we are a small country. We are 400 kilometers from south to north. That's it. We are smaller than Metro Manila by population. We are a small country. We will win this war. But this is a major, major challenge, and countries are looking at Israel to see, because today it's Israel, tomorrow it's another country. Everybody knows it. Everybody understands it.
You said you wanted to hear international support. Are you hoping to hear specifically from some countries, or?
Well, the issue is developing, but we are expecting countries in the world to condemn terrorism, to condemn the attacks on Israel, certainly.
I see.
As we do, and I think it is starting already.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me bring in my other reporter, EJ Gomez, who covers agriculture. EJ, would you like to ask your question, please?
In July 2019, you signed an implementing agreement with our former Agriculture Secretary Manuel Piñol regarding the 44 billion long-term loan. And I'd like to know what exactly Israel has done since the signing of the deal. And regarding the amount, have you channeled the Israeli government the entire amount of that long-term loan? And if not, what amount have you transferred to the Department of Agriculture or the counterpart of Israel Department of Agriculture here?
Okay, just to extend on the background of the project, which is a very important one, Philippines suffers for a deficit in rice. when I was a child, we were educated that the Philippines is the food basket of Asia for rice. When I came here 3 years ago, I found out that you are importing rice. So probably something has changed. I'm not an expert, but something has changed. And we came with Israeli technology that we offered it to the Philippines to use solar irrigation, solar energy for irrigation. Now in Israel, if you haven't been, every apartment, every house mandatory has solar panels. The sun is for free, and you have lots of sun in the Philippines. And you use the solar energy to irrigate and to fertigate the rice fields, and it can bring you most of the country to have 2 cycles of rice and even more. So the Philippine government decided to go ahead with this. We gave this a framework agreement that when the Philippines will decide which Israeli company will do the project, then we will give our development assistance and we follow it, and including guarantees for credits. The issue now is there are some legal issues in the Philippines. From the Israeli side, we are willing to move forward, and the ball is in the court of the Philippines, but it's something that we would like very much to do. We understand the needs in the Philippines, and I think there are already 2 in Lumban, in Laguna, there are still 2 units already working. I was there, I was amazed. A day which was very cloudy, and just from the little sun, the irrigation was there. So I spoke several times with Secretary Dar about it, and I know it's in the process, in the pipelines, and I hope it will be implemented soon. So it's still not finalized, I would say, but it's in the pipeline, and we hope. For our side, we are more than willing to continue, but it's a decision still to be taken here on the next steps with the project.
All right.
I will add, beside this, we will continue also during COVID to do the training for Filipinos. Now we do it not physically because you can travel, but especially on fertigation, irrigation, everything related to post-harvest, drip irrigation, hydroponic, and all those technologies that Israel has already introduced here in the Philippines.
All right, sir. So looking forward, what are some prospects of investments is Israeli government looking to here in the Philippine agriculture? Do you have specific, let's say, crops or aquaculture sector, for example, that your public and private sector is looking forward to invest to?
It's not the Israeli government that is doing the investments. It's the Israeli private sector. Our role as a government is to create the conditions that will facilitate and help the private sector to do this. And actually, we started discussing with the department, the DTI, about a mutual bilateral investment agreement that will facilitate it. So part of the issues that we opened our economic mission here in September was exactly for those issues, because there is a great interest among the Israeli private sector, by the way, not only in agriculture, in the area, speaking post-COVID, investing in the health system, bringing Israeli technologies to deal with health challenges like COVID and others. High-tech, you know, you drive on ETSA and you use Waze. Waze is in Israel. Viber was created in Israel, and many more technologies. So there's a lot of interest. They see the potential, and I just hope that after COVID, they can physically come here, because at the end of the day, the business community is physically to come, and it's pretty challenging now during COVID, even though all the Israelis are vaccinated. But I see a lot of potential, and into this, when the flights and the tourism will start, the Israelis are eager to go back to the Philippines, eager.
I just have one more question. You've mentioned a while ago that it will always be different for all countries. But if there's one thing that the Philippine agriculture or the leadership of Agriculture Secretary William Dar can learn from the agriculture industry of Israel, what would it be?
First, I can learn a lot from my good friend Secretary Dar. He's a top expert, so I don't think we need to do the other way around. I don't think there is one area. And again, Israel, we are a small country, and we used to be, and don't forget, we used to be 60 years ago, our agriculture was the major segment of our economy. We moved from being a country which was based on agriculture. Today, approximately it's 2% of our GDP is agriculture, okay? But we are doing smart agriculture. Today, agriculture is becoming more and more high-tech. You know, you use drones to look at your fields. And it's all computerized. You know, I look at the dairy farm, for example. In Israel, every cow is connected to a computer by chip. Every cow is connected to a computer. You know how much milk it gives, what is the fever, and other issues. And there is one farm here, dairy farm in Laguna, that is the same like in Israel. So this technology is the one that we are more than willing to introduce here in the Philippines.
Sir, I read somewhere that Israel will soon open its doors to Filipino tourists, especially pilgrims. What made you decide to open your doors to Filipino pilgrims? I
There's
believe
just
there will be some requirements for them to enter Israel, and I was wondering if you have preferred vaccines. I mean, uh, should they be vaccinated with Pfizer or Moderna,
yeah, yeah.
or
Okay. Yeah.
how about those vaccinated with or inoculated with Sinovac?
Okay. First, during the pandemic, OFWs from the Philippines, caregivers continue to go to Israel. Okay, most of the time, including now. About tourism, and about tourism, Israel has decided slowly to open Israel for tourism. We are promoting what we call a green passport agreements with some countries. We have with Greece, I think with Cyprus, which means that both countries accept the vaccines. By the case of Israel, it's Moderna and it's Pfizer, and then you create this bubble that the tourists can come if they are vaccinated with these vaccines, or if they were sick, they do a serological test when they come. I can tell you that the Filipinos that are in Israel, and let's say they come now to the Philippines for see their families and returning to Israel, and they've been vaccinated in Israel by Pfizer, while on quarantine, they just do a test, and if they are clear, then there's no quarantine. So I think this is it. It's still a pilot, but you know we are looking towards discussing it more and more with more and more countries. The European Union just approved entering of Israel without Israelis because we are vaccinated and the pandemic is hardly in Israel. So I think this will be an issue, and I think here we are willing, and actually we already offered to have this kind of discussions with the Philippine government to create this green passport. Again, the vaccines that Israel has recognized until now, and those are the only ones that are in Israel, actually, it's Pfizer and Moderna. I know that there are discussions about AstraZeneca because many countries, but this is where we stand now.
Thank you. Ambassador, I want to take you back to our initial talking points about the situation in Israel and Palestine, and I'm just concerned. But first, can you give us, for the Filipinos who are not familiar with Hamas, what should we know about Hamas? What is it? I mean, for Filipinos who don't understand.
Okay, it's like the Islamic Brotherhood. It's a terrorist group. The regime should be Islamic regime, and when it comes to Israel, okay, it's the destruction of Israel. There should be a Jewish state. The Jews should go back to their own countries. This is their ideology. It's not okay. We have let's discuss it. We have a problem with you. Now Hamas took over Gaza from the Palestinian Authority because Israel signed few agreements with the Palestinian Authority. Hamas is sponsored by Iran. And then inside Gaza, we have also Islamic Jihad with another extremist ideology. So these are the guys that we are dealing with. It's not somebody that you can sit for a coffee and then, okay, let's agree with it. The issue is non-agreement. They understand one word, is attacking a terrorist group, indiscriminate killing of civilians. This is their ideology. And you need to protect yourself. If not, you are not survive. So this is the war that we are fighting. And by the way, it's since our existence, but Hamas became a very strong power when they took over by force Gaza in 2006.
But what is the link of Hamas to Iran? Because that link has been something that I've been hearing a lot about. And recently there's been some attacks in Iran that Iran blames on Israel, and now this. I mean, are those things related at all?
Iran is the main sponsor of terrorism in the world, not just in the Middle East. It's Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah. There is a long list. They are involved in Yemen and all over the Middle East. Hamas is the main sponsor of terrorism, training terrorists, supply them with all those missiles and others. This is Iran. So Iran is behind it. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows that Iran is the main sponsor of terrorism. And again, Israel has to put. So so those are including Hezbollah in Lebanon, by the way, which is like the biggest non-state army in the world. And Israel has to defend it. In addition, Iran is moving forward with its nuclear program. And look at the terminology of Iran. We should wipe Israel off the map. A country which is a member of the United Nations calling to wipe another country, and the world stays pretty silent. Iran is a mixture of an extreme Islamic ideology mixed with capabilities of weapons of mass destruction. In addition, they are the main sponsor of terrorism. So there is a big umbrella here that Hamas is under this umbrella and Islamic Jihad also.
Well, you know, Filipinos are very interested in the security situation in the Middle East because we have millions of our countrymen there. Do you think that the situation that we're seeing now in Israel will escalate into something larger? I mean, that will impact security in the Middle East?
Well, for the time being, I don't see it that way. But you know, you can never know. But we have those rounds of escalations in the past. This time, the intensity of the attacks on civilians in Israel by Hamas is the strongest that we had, and then we need to retaliate and to defend ourselves.
I'm just wondering, why is it, you know, and this may be a naive question, Ambassador, why is it so difficult for Israel and Iran to get together? Because, you know, my understanding is some of the Arab countries are a lot more intolerant about the Jewish religion. In Iran, at least Jewish people can worship, and it would seem to me, from a naive, you know, mind, that you guys would be. It would be easier for you guys to be friends more than it would be for Israel and the Arabs to be friends.
Well, you know that during the Shah period, we had embassies in both countries, but the ideology of the Islamic regime is one: destruction of Israel. That's it. So would you meet the one that wants to destruct you? You know, we have nothing against the Iranian people. The issue is the regime, which is, you know, Iran is far away from us, but they are meddling in our affairs, and on their missiles, it's written Tel Aviv. That's what they read. So these are, it's not a neighboring country. Let's discuss. We have disagreements. This is the reality.
Right. I'm just wondering, is there a role for the Philippines to play? Because the Philippines is very close to Israel. Not many people understand the long, you know, friendly relations between Philippines and Israel. You know, beginning with harboring the Jewish refugees from Europe a long time ago. Is there something that, you know, and the Philippines also, you know, has relations with Iran. Is there something you think that the Philippines can play, or you would like to see the Philippines take a more different posture with regard to what's happening now with the rocket attacks in Israel?
Well, we always have the support of the Philippines, and actually our relationship are now, I think, at the highest point ever. And we have very friendly relations. We support each other. I mentioned all those issues, and I'm sure that this will deepen and widen. I think this is the answer I can give you. And we just hope that the Philippines, you're also facing these challenges of COVID, which we are following very closely. And I believe that things will I see the numbers going down, which is encouraging, and I hope this trend will continue. And when the vaccines are coming, and I see that more and more vaccines are pouring into the country, so things will improve. I can tell you from our experience, I can take this potato say Philippines, when the vaccines will come, take the vaccines, you know, get the vaccines. It saves life. You know, we have, Israel is the model. You know, at the beginning, many people were hesitant. We were the first. Now we can tell you it's working. It's working. So I highly recommend you to take it. And also, be careful between the first and second dose. You're not fully protected. Many people in Israel, you know, you feel very confident after the first dose. You need to complete the cycle. When it comes to Pfizer, it's 28-day cycle. You have the 96% approximately protection after 28 days from the first dose then you have the food. So this is very, and then you can see that you feel much safer and much confidence. And again, to find this right balance between the economy and the public health. This is the major challenge for all our countries, So I believe that the Philippines will, and Israel will do whatever we can to share our experience and assist.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to mention? Maybe something else that we haven't asked?
Yeah, I'm happy that we have this opportunity, and I hope that soon quiet will go back to Israel, and the international community will understand that no country can accept these terror attacks on Israel, and that we have the full right for self-defense. And when it comes to Israel and the Philippines, we have a great prospect for very good and friendly relations, and I want to thank you for the role that your paper, which I enjoy very much reading, is doing in bringing the news to the Filipino people.
Ambassador Harpaz, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate it. Keep us in mind if there are new developments you'd like to announce to our countrymen. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. I do so. Thank you very much, and stay safe, and go to Israel when COVID is over.
I would love to. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador.